You must stop feeding the lion of prejudice if you want access to $1 million opportunities. Maggie Lena Walker is known as the first black owner of a bank, and she spoke on the importance of creating access and economic opportunities within the black community, and women in particular she was focusing a lot on. And she gives 4 ways to have access and create $1 million opportunities for those who are even on the outside looking in. When you are not on the inside, let's say you're not in the good old boys club, as they would say, you have to operate differently than someone who is on the inside, who already knows everybody, who has the elbow rubbing, or maybe the lineage where they kind of get grandfathered into a lot of opportunities. If you're an outsider, you want to make sure that you're focusing on education first. And that doesn't necessarily just define a classroom. It has a lot to do with just what have you learned? What skills do you know? What avenues can you create new opportunities for yourself? Those who already have the inside track, they rarely have to invest in the credentials that you would have to do. Now, it's very important to understand that this is just your first step. Don't think that by having an advanced degree or having a certification is automatically going to open every door available to you. Economic empowerment is the only empowerment that matters if you're listening to what Maggie Walker is talking about. And so while education is a very important first step, her as a teacher and educator, she understood how important it was. It allowed her different avenues to appreciate the influence that education has on future generations. So during segregation at her time, she wanted to make sure that they had the skills necessary. So they spent a lot of time on not only like the math and the reading, but they also wanted them to feel proud of themselves, their own abilities, and the avenues that they had available. And for example, when one of her graduating classes wanted to have their graduation ceremony in the local theater in Richmond, Virginia, they told them no. They said that that was not for the black students. Now, Maggie did not accept this. Her and her students protested against this decision, explaining that they pay taxes as anyone else and that you had to allow this theater to be used by all schools. Now, while they did not succeed in that avenue, this activism, this ability to not accept things as the way they are, is a very important educational tip as well. You want to be always focused on the solutions. That's how you create access and economic opportunities. You can't be focused on the problems. You got to move right into the solutions. Next, Maggie talked about the importance of starting within your community. And you often find that a lot of successful black businesses at this time, they were serving their community. So it was right after the end of the Civil War, so we're going through the Reconstruction. A lot of access was available to blacks because no one was really sure what to do from here, right? The war ended. Now we're trying to figure out where all the pieces land. And blacks were making what good living for themselves, serving each other, helping each other, hiring each other, and spending within their own community. So Maggie was a very large proponent of the need to buy black, that they're going to hire you, they're going to reinvest in your community. You can't possibly go to the segregated side and where you're not allowed to go in through the front door and they don't really give you a lot of service, but they'll take your money. Like, you can't possibly make that decision and think that that's going to create more access and opportunities for you in the future. So when you focus on your community, then you are creating a new level of empowerment where people are able to be excited about the opportunities that are available to them. Now, a good example of this in today's world, if you've ever gone on oneunited.com, that's the largest black-owned bank in America, you can see that even on the debit cards where you're allowed to be proud of your culture and your heritage, where there are black and brown people throughout history on the debit cards, and you can choose these cards. You just won't really find that in most communities outside of your own. Now, they may make like a couple stamps here and there during Black History Month, but the overall idea of being proud of who you are, it's such an important factor in the success that you create for yourself. And you often have to kind of suppress that in a world where we don't want people to deviate too far from the norm. And then you have to ask yourself, well, what is the norm? And so when you're able to find communities that encourage and empower you to chase your ambitions, where they're rooting for you, as I would liken it to. It creates more opportunities and more access to those $1 million opportunities because people are working together. And then that leads you into the third one, which is you have to have a solid network when you're working as an outsider trying to work your way in. So Maggie ends up talking about some of the work that she was doing with different fraternal orders. Now, she ended up becoming president of the Independent Order of St. Luke's, I believe, in 1901. And at the time, they had about $31 in their treasury. They had about 1,000 members. And this is really no different than you would think of like the Freemasons and different fraternal organizations, even ones like the KKK, in the sense that these are organizations where people are paying dues and then you're advocating for things that matter to you. And so this one was a lot of black business owners. And Maggie, when she became president, she had joined, I believe it said at like 16 years old. So she worked her way up. And so when she became the president, she started working on a lot of initiatives. So some of her teaching background, she's like, really, it's the kids of the future are very important. So she created a juvenile program within their organization that focused on that. She also said, look, we have the brains, we have the willpower, but we need to make our own bank. And so she said, we need to put our money together, open our own bank. It's very important that we do this in our community, for our community. And they did. They opened their bank within the heart of the Black District, and it was very successful, and it was doing amazing work. And so you really want to make sure that you have this network, this ability for you to be able to capitalize on some of these opportunities and some of the access that will be provided. Now, it doesn't always mean that you're only associating with like black and brown people. Maggie, for example, it talks about one of her mentors outside of her pastor and her mom is this other banker, and this guy was a Caucasian, and he was rooting for Maggie, where he helped her, he mentored her, he provided her a lot of the knowledge. And so she took some of the mentoring from him with some accounting classes at night so she could understand banking a little bit better, and then she was able to open and become the first black woman that was the president of a chartered bank. Her next initiative was to create a retail space. She thought it was very important to serve the black community in a way where they could be proud of who they are and the work that they've done, and they're able to invest in the byproducts and get the customer service that most of us have come to expect today. And so while doing that, she started off, and it was something where people were like, whoa, now you're going to be messing with, the Caucasian business owners and their money. So it actually is very interesting. They tried to pay her $10,000 to not start that business. And she had turned it down, and she kept on building it, and it took them about 7 years. And then eventually the Caucasians were able to get to her suppliers and said, look, if you continue providing her these supplies, then you're not going to be allowed to provide the supplies in the Caucasian-owned businesses. And so after about 7 years of them trying to figure out a way to close her business down, that one ended up working. Without her being able to get the supplies, she was unable to provide the service and to sell. And so you want to make sure that this is kind of part of the importance of the community, where everybody is striving towards creating something within the information that they have and the skill sets that they have learned. That you may have to work 3, 4, 5, even 10 years within a certain company and a certain business, but after that, you're going to want to start your own business where in some way where you're then able to support each other. Like imagine if Maggie was able to have access to a black supplier, then that wouldn't have had the same issue. And so you want to make sure that we're all working together towards creating millionaires in the community, towards creating wealth and providing this access to opportunities so that black wealth doesn't hit zero in 2053. And the third business that Maggie opened, she had opened her own newspaper. And so she had hired a bunch of black women to run this newspaper, and she was the editor-in-chief. And so she was speaking out against some of the different laws and some of the Jim Crow as they were coming into the Jim Crow era. And it was something that she knew was important. Now, no one had an issue with the newspaper because they're like, look, we're not really serving that audience anyways, go right ahead. So 2 of her 3 original ideas were successful. And the third one was only because it was taking money out of the other communities. Now, one of the cool things that Maggie was able to capitalize on is because of her network, because of the organization, because of the influence that she has built, she speaks on the idea of during some of the segregated times where they're like, okay, some of the rail cars where they were deciding if blacks were allowed even in those same rail cars. And early in those discussions, Maggie had decided, look, guys, we need to just boycott these rail cars because we're not being treated right. They just want our money, but they're not treating us with the same respect. And so it took them, there was a 2-year boycott, which is crazy when you think about just the idea that you went 2 years of walking. But she said we had to walk because our pride could expect no less from us. And the rail cars, they ended up going bankrupt, which just really speaks on kind of some of the venom and the hatred that they were dealing with. That instead of just simply allowing the black passengers to kind of sit where they wanted, to be able to integrate or kind of work with in the rail car system, they just said, we'll file bankruptcy before we give in to your demands. And so it's really important to just kind of understand the power that they had through their influence, but also just not accepting that, well, you'll take my money, you don't take anything else. Like, that's not good enough. And it was during those 10 years, you find a lot of times when I'm speaking on a lot of these older, early black millionaires, that they were very early within the Reconstruction period because it was kind of like everything was open. And then as you went into the Jim Crow era, the approach that had to be taken had changed. And then and then some of the systematic issues that we even see today started being put in place. And it just means that you have to operate in a different way, not in no way at all. And so the fourth and final method that you have to use when you are trying to create access and $1 million opportunities for yourself is you got to be a founder. You often find that at some point in time, you're going to run into some sort of a ceiling where the expectation of you, or maybe even if there's no problem at all, is just simply, look, as you get higher up the ladder, there's only like 3 people that could get the position every 15 years. So what if they just hired the person like the month before? So then are you going to wait 15 years? Well, no, of course not. But if you created your own opportunity as a founder, then you don't have to wait 15 years. Maybe you have to work hard for 3 to 5 years as you're building that clientele, and then you have the even greater of an opportunity than other people may have been able to give you if you stayed within a certain company and a certain organization. Especially for black women at the time, Maggie Walker understood that there wasn't going to be a lot of jobs outside of being like a seamstress or working in laundry or things like that. And so if you wanted an opportunity as a person of color and as a woman in that time, then you often had to create your own institution. And so an example of this easily would be the fact that, I don't know if you know, but when Maggie was married, that by law in Virginia, you were no longer allowed to be a teacher. It wasn't that she quit teaching, it was that when she got married, she was no longer legally allowed to teach. She had to, go home and raise her kids. Like, that's what the society had deemed. That's what the laws had dictated. So while she was raising her kids, she was able to then start creating some of these companies and these organizations. But that was in response to the idea that you can't possibly be a good mother and have a career of any kind. And so Maggie understood just what they were going against as far as women in society. And so she was creating opportunities for them. Maggie L. Walker made it very clear that if you wanted to fight systemic issues, if you wanted to create access and opportunities for your community, then you have to stop feeding the lion of prejudice. You have to expect more than simply just giving your money and receiving a product. You have to demand where they almost are seeking your business at the level that you see with other ones, where they are learning your culture, where they are creating departments that are focused on giving you the same experience exactly as you need it within things that you're striving to accomplish, because everybody's trying to do different things. We all have this dream life, but we all have different paths, different methods, different ways to communicate for us to get there. I mean, there's tons of studies out there that just talk about even the verbiage on a recruiter's description of a job can dictate whether a man or a woman applies for it. And that same verbiage will come into play deciding which race would apply for a certain position. And so you want to make sure that you're holding the places that you spend your money accountable in the sense that they need to reinvest in your community. Otherwise, they're just taking money out of your community, which leads to poverty and crime and other issues and a poor educational structure. If the money that you're always spending is always leaving your community where they're never reinvesting in it, then you're only creating the inevitable, which is black wealth hitting zero in the year 2053. If we want to overcome this obstacle, we have to start putting money aside where we invest in ourselves, and not only in ourselves in the sense of our community, but literally in yourself. You cannot take your money in and spend all of it where all of your money is going. You have to be able to put something aside. Instead of thinking of it as an emergency fund, think of it as your opportunity fund. Your opportunity to take a risk and start a company, your opportunity to get that new job that you were thinking about, your opportunity to pay for your kids' college, to take that trip, to buy that home. It is your opportunity fund. And you got to start putting something aside where you pay yourself. If you're ready to get started on that, I do have a free resource for you. I'll put it down in the show notes, but it's also, you can go to forecasthope.com/opportunity. There you can get the resource, and I encourage you to use it. I'm always available if you have any questions. If you're enjoying this, please subscribe. I appreciate always your time. Until next time, continue blessings on your journey to become the champion of your dream life. And as always, better self, better wealth.